So with that introduction, Dr. Giordano, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks. It's great to be back. Thank you very much.
So just to kick us off and to kind of level set before we dive in deeper, can you define what you mean by the word neuroweapons?
The idea of using any instrument or method as means of contending against others is a very formal definition of a weapon. It need not be something that is malevolent per se, but again, by operational definition, what a weapon does is in some way alters that individual's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, physical nature, health, in such a way that is going to be more amenable to the individual who is yielding the weapon. So, in other words, I'm changing an individual's stance towards me in some way and making them engage in a stance that's more aligned with what I want them to be. That's a formal definition of a weapon that comes right out of the Oxford English Dictionary. Clearly, when we think of weapons, we think of things like bombs, tanks, planes, boats, soldiers. And that's not incorrect. I mean, I think the more colloquial use of a weapon represents some instrument that's going to induce some kind of morbidity or mortality. And when utilized in these bellicose constructs, that's certainly one of the ideas of weaponology. But weaponology, as we discussed last time, can also include things that I do to my own forces, whether it's the human resources or whether the actual forces themselves, to make them more efficient in their mission of national security, intelligence, and defense, not only in terms of what I do to others. In that sense, if we put the neuro prefix to weapon, what we're really looking at is harnessing the neurological system, both peripherally and centrally, and its functions of thought, emotions, and behavior, so as to then yield instruments, methods, techniques, tactics, and tools that can then be leveraged against others, so as for us to then gain some purchase over their thoughts, emotions, and conduct. So a neuroweapon is essentially any weaponized method or tool that acts through the nervous system or at the nervous system, upon the nervous system, to influence and change the attitudes, feelings, thoughts, behaviors of others.
Thanks for that overview. So when we talk about neuroweapons, what types of technologies fall under that umbrella?
I mean, I think what is important to understand is that the basic technologies of the brain sciences can be parsed into two general categories, very generally. Those technologies that are used for assessing the brain, and those technologies that are used for accessing and affecting the brain. And underneath those two general ideas, we can assess what's going on in individuals and groups of individuals' brains so as to be able to gain some notion of what nodes and networks are involved in different processes of cognition, emotion, and various actions, and what their dispositions might be. And we can use those both as information and as possible reconnaissance targets, if you will, to then affect those substrates, those processes and mechanisms, either indirectly through the use of narratives, memes, symbols, iconographies, psychological operations, human terrain teaming engagements, or more directly. Now, when we're talking about things that are direct, now we're talking about interventional things. And given the fact that the neurosciences are indeed a biomedical life science that also conjoins the physical sciences, now what we're talking about is those things that tend to fall under the rubric of biological toxins and chemical weapons, broadly construed as drugs, microbes or bugs, toxins, devices, and data. And it's those latter two, devices and data, that are really becoming ever more prominent as a consideration and a concern with regard to international oversight and perhaps regulation of what weaponology should and perhaps could be, and how neuroscience and neurotechnologies are then leverageable and employable as weapons on a variety of different fronts, not only being used kinetically, but increasingly being used as non-kinetic instruments to effect disruptive effects rather than destructive effects per se.